So, Renato, what the hell is going on in our justice system right now?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal contributor for ABC News.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skeet. Wow, Asha. Well, literally, we are recording this on Friday, the 21st. And just recently, just within the last hour or two, Judge Ho, who was overseeing he was the judge assigned to the Eric Adams indictment, overseeing that criminal case, and was considering the government's motion, the Justice Department's motion to dismiss that indictment without prejudice, for them to bring it back if Eric Adams doesn't follow their directives on immigration issues and other things. He after, and this, of course, being something that Eric Adams desperately wanted, he has decided to appoint Paul Clement, who was the Solicitor General in the George W. Bush administration, perhaps very, best known, or if we're arguing, he was arguing Bush versus Gore before he was in that administration, but definitely a known, I would say, known critic of Donald Trump's, but with impeccable conservative credentials, appointed him to present the other side. And the reason I say the other side, I'll put that in air quotes, is there was no other side here. Both sides wanted this case dismissed. And the judge found that when both sides agree, given the adversarial nature of our judicial system, it can be of use for the court to appoint someone to present the opposing point of view. And he noted that Justice Kagan had done that in a prior Supreme Court case. What do you make of this, Asha? It's I think a little bit unexpected by the judge.
It's unexpected, but as you said, in our system, the idea is that we get to the truth by having two different sides presented, right? This happens in a criminal trial. You have the prosecution, you have the defense, and the jury is sitting there impartially and being able to weigh those pieces. So I think we discussed this last week, where you said it would be inappropriate for the judge to sua sponte kind of initiate some kind of investigation, because then he would be actually playing the devil's advocate instead of being in this impartial role. So what he's doing is he's bringing in somebody to, as you said, present the other side. And I think we see this in other contexts. The Supreme Court does sometimes ask, for example, the Solicitor General to come in and present a view, even if they're not a party, even if the government isn't a party to the case. That's why the Solicitor General is known as the 10th Justice, because sometimes they'll come as an advisor to the court to kind of present a view. In cases involving in family law, the court will appoint a guardian ad litem to represent the child's interest. For example, if there's like a debate going on between the state and parents, or between two parents, or something like that, to represent the child's interest. And so I think, the question is, like, whose interest is Paul Clement actually representing? That is what I think might be a little bit tricky here, because technically the government should be representing the interests of the people. But as you said, right now, those are aligned. Those have been now kind of conflated with also the defendant's interests, and we're not really seeing it. So he just wants an opposing.
This is a very dicey thing. And the judge is, I thought the reason he took it under advisement is is a very careful line that he's drawing here. So first of all, just say, somebody who litigates across the country all the time, there are tons of motions that are uncontested all the time in courts across this country, including in criminal cases. And in fact, most of the time when the government moves to dismiss an indictment, it is uncontested for a good reason, right? Obviously, the defense doesn't, wants the same thing as the government. So the context you said are all accurate, that there are times where a court appoints it. I think The example of the Supreme Court, I think, is most probably in some ways most analogous in that when there's a change in administration, and the administration is no longer, for example, defending a particular statute, the justices will sometimes appoint someone to do so because this is a statute and needs to have somebody vindicating it. I think here it is a bit of a stretch for the judge to try to analogize that. And I think he's doing it for a couple of reasons. One, he was very careful. All he said is having an adversary, the adversarial system helps us sort of make decisions, can help him make decisions. And I'm going to make a prediction. My prediction is he's going to let this go forward because, as he noted repeatedly throughout the hearing, which I think we had a discussion about this a week ago, and I kind of previewed that the case law is not very robust about giving him any, doesn't give him much leeway. I think he suggested that his authority is narrow. So I think he's going to say, okay, I've heard both sides. And really what he's doing here is he's using Clement as a way of helping some facts to be brought out in the course of this hearing before he does what he essentially has to do.
Yeah, maybe. Do you think that there's any chance that he would dismiss it with prejudice? Like, does he have that discretion? So remember that the motion that's being made here is to dismiss these charges without prejudice. So meaning that the Justice Department could go after Eric Adams. And so there's this sword of Damocles that continues to hang over him. And it kind of is the tell, right? Like if this was actually a meritorious, request, if it was based on insufficiency of the evidence, or they didn't believe that they were going to actually be able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, or this was actually a politically motivated and unjustified prosecution, there would be no reason not to dismiss it with prejudice. It's an unfair prosecution. Get rid of it. It should never have been brought. The fact that they want to have it dismissed, but without prejudice, is super sketch. That's super shady.
It is. I mean, the only other reason you could think of would be, it does happen in other cases where you may have an evidentiary issue, but it's early on in the case and, you decide that you're going to dismiss it, but you may be able to cure that problem or something along those lines, but it's pretty rare. I think it's fair to say, very rare. Usually in that circumstance, the defense would want to push for dismissal with prejudice. In other words, let's say I was on the defense side. The government had a witness, developed Alzheimer's or something happened. They died or something along those lines. And they don't have their ducks in a row. They're like, we want to dismiss it. But without prejudice, I'd be like, well, if you don't have your shit together, so to speak, I think I can swear on this. Hopefully, if not, it can get bleeped. If you don't have your crap together, then let me push you now. I want my speedy trial unless you dismiss it with prejudice. So I don't know. But I think I don't think he's going to be that cute. That's my prediction. I could be wrong.
You don't think he's going to dismiss it with prejudice?
That said, I will say if you ask me, I don't think I said this in the last episode, but if you asked me, my prediction would have been that he didn't do what he did here. And it's clear that the judge is concerned about what happened here and wants to do whatever he can do within his power to at least bring the truth out as much as possible. The only thing I will say is a flip side of dismissing it with prejudice. No one's asked for it, and if the judge does that, there's two things. First of all, the government can be appealed, and then that could be reviewed, right? I mean, I think if he grants the motion, who's going to appeal it? If he doesn't, they could appeal that. And then second of all, there is this issue of technically speaking, the next president, assuming there is another president in the United States eventually, if in, let's say, 3 years or 4 years, could move forward with this case. This then would preclude that.
Yeah, as you were talking, I thought about that too, that the point of dismissing it with prejudice would really only be to thwart the leverage that the Justice Department has over Eric Adams. It's not necessarily in furtherance of actual justice if this was a meritorious prosecution to begin with. So It's not ideal. And quite frankly, I don't know that it would necessarily neutralize this whole, quid pro quo necessarily, because at the end of the day, Adams would still perhaps feel, grateful and beholden and still go along with whatever he's supposed to do at this stage. So I don't know that it would change anything about the nature of that relationship. And then, as you said, it would then tie the hands of future prosecutors. But I feel a little bit vindicated, Renato, because you and I had a pretty spirited debate, and you were very certain that he was going to just do the deal and move on. And I felt like it didn't occur to me that this was an option, but I do feel that, as you said, he is concerned and he is using the mechanisms in his power to try to at least bring sunlight to this situation, which in some ways is perhaps the best we can hope for. But can I just ask you, wasn't there something similar that Aileen Cannon did? There was like a third party amicus that brought a motion. Do you remember this?
Vaguely. I mean,
I know there was so much crazy things happening in her unicorn law court, but it was something that was unprecedented, and like rando amicus came in, and I thought they filed a motion to do something.
I think the most,
and she entertained it.
My recollection is that if I'm looking for an analogous situation, wasn't it Emmett Sullivan was it the Flynn case? He was concerned about some deal that was going on with sentencing, and so he appointed somebody, John Gleason, to present a different view. I don't know if it was sentencing or dismissal or something. And he appointed former Judge John Gleason, now in private practice, to present a different view. That's my recollection. I think he was mandamus and then overcame that the DC Circuit. Like the DC Circuit let it ride.
Okay.
That's my recollection.
I don't remember that. I'm just talking about in general. I mentioned this last week. If we're talking about judges going rogue and like just doing crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there are judges that have done crazier stuff, is my point.
Yeah, that may be true. But I actually think what happened here, Judge Ho realized the entire world's going to be looking at this. He wants to get it right. My guess is he took it under advisement. He talked to other judges who he trusted and respected to get their views, and came up with the most careful way of moving forward. I think this is very careful, but I just think it's much safer for him if he just grants the motion at the end.
Has Trump tweeted about him yet?
No, but I don't know if there is one. I mean, there a tweet coming. In other words, if you're Emile Beauvais, I think what you say is that to Trump is just like, be quiet. This guy's going to grant the motion. Like, let's just let it be. What are we going to do? Renato.
You think that it's as easy as somebody saying, just be quiet and ride this one out? Has Trump ever heeded the counsel of what would be in his best interest to get the outcome that he wants?
Maybe not. I give you that. That fair enough. I mean, he may do what he's going to do. That would be interesting if that happens. It'd be very interesting because, of course, as we know, for example, in the Manhattan case, he went after Judge Merchan, and in the end, Merchan weathered the storm and ultimately completed the case and gave him no sentence. So I don't know whether it mattered, but there was this like tiny measure of victory for the justice system there in New York that, even when the former president and president-elect was under investigation, that Justice Merchan saw that case through, basically.
Well, and he antagonized the judge in his civil case too.
Yes. Well, 100%. Yes.
That one really made him mad.
Yeah,
we talked about that at length when that was going on, where you're like, yeah, he could just shut up, and it's not really helping him because getting adversarial with the judge who's ruling on all of these motions is not helpful.
Yeah. He didn't like the judge in the E. Jean Carroll case either. But I think here it's not involving him. He's not there personally. And he's got a lot of other mayhem that he's causing.
I predict he's going to call for Judge Ho's impeachment.
Okay.
I think that's going to be the next thing. Is every time a judge does something that is against literally anything they do, there somebody like him, Elon Musk, the whole right wing, whatever, is going to start calling for impeachment, because that's going to be the way to chill it. So, all of this is about loyalty, right?
Yeah.
How do we get people to comply?
Sure.
And if that's your goal, a huge threat for you is an independent judiciary, right?
Mhm.
Because they are appointed for life. They
Right.
they can completely thwart you. So I think that, whether or not they're going to go through with it, I don't know. But already they called for the impeachment of the judge that issued the TRO against oh my God, I'm not even remembering which move it was. Was it the Treasury Department? There's so many TROs happening. But
There's
yeah,
so many.
There's so many, but and there's actually a congressperson who who I think has drafted articles of impeachment against that judge. So, I don't know that it's going to go anywhere, but expect that. This is my prediction. I think that's going to start becoming like the lock her up chant of Trump 2.0.
Oh, impeach the judge?
What's that?
Impeach the judge?
Impeach the judge. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. I think it's going to be interesting to see, though. I mean, the judiciary standing against Trump from a democracy perspective, that is actually, I think it matters. I actually think having Trump pitted against the judiciary and the judiciary saying this is not lawful, I think that is a fault line that could move the needle. I do think the Trump administration cares about how they're perceived by the public, and I do think the public still has the ability to make a difference here. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think in Judge Ho's case, what remains to be seen how much he's going to fight here, because he's got a lot of judges to be mad at right now. Trump does, but I'm never going to bet against Trump doing something unhinged. So that's entirely within the realm of possibility. But I mean, I think, look, to me, it's an example. I think this whole affair, okay, when I say this whole affair, I mean the whole Eric Adams thing is a great example of how facts still matter, how the public can still get mobilized. And it's also, I think, Asha, an important example of the Trump administration shooting itself in the foot. If you remember in our last episode, we talked about how it was interesting, I said, that the Trump administration and Emil Bove in that letter did not present like, well, there's factually our evidence is bad or our legal theories are bad or we have an issue winning in court. He actually just came out and said it in terms of what was happening. It was interesting. I don't know if you noticed, but Pam Bondi's chief of staff tweeted out or X'd out or whatever they call it over there now, thread basically saying, oh, there's evidentiary issues. Our legal theory is all out there, and trying to clean up what Bove did. I guess the point I'm trying to make is I think the mistakes and the missteps and the sloppiness in the Trump administration is causing the public to see what's happening here. And I think it's going to make a difference.
And I think for that, sunlight is important. And so bringing as much out to the forefront for the public to know is really key. And hopefully that will happen here at the very least.
Yeah, I agree. Judge Ho is not only it's bringing sunlight, and it is, I think using his power as a judge to ensure that what's happening in his court, if an injustice can't be prevented from occurring, then at the very least, the public should see exactly what's happening. So, Asha, there's a lot to talk about at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, your former home. We now have FBI Director Cash Money Patel, who I think it was one of our first episodes of this podcast was Cash. Cash was the cover person on our YouTube, Cash Money, because he was at that time appeared to be perjuring himself to benefit the then
The
former
classified,
president of the
yeah,
United
the
States.
classified documents investigation.
Yep.
So I'm a member of the Society of Former Agents of the FBI, and they just circulated a message from the director, and it was shockingly normal.
Okay. Really?
Shockingly normal.
Like, hey,
Like,
I'm
like,
honored,
I'm
whatever.
honored. You all have the backs of the American people and are courageous, and I have your backs, and da, 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 all of it.
Wow.
Could have been written by Christopher Wray. So we shall see. But here's the thing, and I've been sounding the alarm about this all week, and I think it's worth kind of laying this out and starting to put the pieces together. We've talked a bit, or I've written about, but the FBI opens investigations in accordance with something called the Attorney General Guidelines. And those lay out the proper predication that you need for investigations. In other words, what kind of evidence do you need to have before you can open a preliminary investigation, a full investigation? And though the different kinds of investigations authorize different kinds of investigative techniques. The higher the threshold of the investigation, the more intrusive techniques can be used. And I'm bringing this up because, there's so much going on. And honestly, I had missed this until someone had flagged it for me, which is that on Tuesday, Denise Chung, a veteran DC federal prosecutor, resigned because the interim U.S. attorney in DC, Ed Martin, wanted her to open an investigation into, and I'm reading from her resignation letter, into whether a contract had been unlawfully awarded by an executive agency before the change in administration, and to issue grand jury subpoenas pursuant to this investigation. And to make a long story short, she went through what was, the evidence that was there and said there was not enough evidence. There was not sufficient predication to pursue this. She went back and forth with FBI agents at the Washington field office who also didn't believe that there was enough. Eventually, she reached sort of a compromise where she sent a letter to this bank to recommending that they freeze these assets. She couldn't order them because they didn't have the probable cause or whatever they needed to do that. And then he came back and said that wasn't enough. You didn't do what I said, and asked for her resignation. And so she resigned. But I think it gets to, we're starting to see, at least with Ed Martin, a willingness to not play by their own rule book, like not even play by the rules that they themselves have put down. I mean, the Attorney General's, the Department of Justice has for pursuing investigations. And this should really, really worry people. And, because, and this also interfaces with the FBI.
So, a couple thoughts. I mean, first of all, worth noting as well, Ed Martin has been appointed by Trump to be the permanent U.S. attorney in D.C. Okay, that also happened since our last episode. And Martin is, I mentioned during our last segment, Asha, of the incompetence of the Trump administration. I mean, to me, Ed Martin may very well be the poster child for that. Like if you looked it up in the dictionary or the encyclopedia, you'd have his photo. I mean, he has never been a prosecutor, clearly doesn't know what the heck he's doing. I mean, the letters, he's that guy who sent that letter out that we talked about a few weeks back where it's really a head scratcher with the typo and didn't make a lot of sense. He sent also just this past week all sorts of letters to members of Congress and senators, like Senator Chuck Schumer. I saw your comments on cable news about Elon Musk. Please explain them. They appear to be threatening, and they were not for First Amendment purposes threatening. What's called a true threat for First Amendment purposes. Please respond to my inquiry. And he one thing I always find interesting about Martin is he starts each letter whenever he's writing these troublesome letters saying, this is sort of what I do. Like this is That's what I do in my
Right.
job.
Right.
Like when I get inquiries, I follow up, and
My
it's like,
job to collect information.
yeah, I know. And it's like, dude, you've had this job for like 3 weeks and you've managed to not do anything the way anyone would ever do with this job. But in the short of it, this is an example of like the example you just mentioned, an abuse of power by Martin, basically using his authority as U.S. attorney to do things that are inconsistent with the Justice Department's guidelines. I mean, there's something called the Justice Manual. You don't just start, firing off letters to people that you're not investigating to get them to give you justifications for your actions, because what backs up that letter is an implicit threat that if they don't, quickly get a lawyer and come up with the perfect response, you might initiate a federal criminal investigation, which would create a lot of problems for that person.
Yes. And, among the rules for predication is that you can't open an investigation solely on the basis of protected First Amendment activity.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that came out of a lot of abuses that happened in the 60s and 70s where people were investigated for not having the kinds of ideas or speeches that the people in power wanted. And we don't want that because that chills speech and is a violation of civil liberties. But it's problematic because it is intended. And by the way, is he like Scooby-Doo? Like, why is he out there? Like, even if you had some kind of investigation, it would be quietly opened. Then, agent goes out and does an interview to find out, Renato, is he does he have secret plans to go, assassinate somebody or whatever? You don't send it in a letter that you post on X. That's not how you gather information.
Well, it's ironic,
Not
right?
even his role. It's not even his job.
Well, it's ironic, right? Because that's why I said his incompetence. He writes these letters as if this is like what he's been doing for the last 20 years. And he just writes these same letters.
This
That's
is
the way.
what I do.
This is what I do. But in actuality, I don't think he has any idea what a federal prosecutor does. And I suspect if he went to people in his office and asked them to do this, they would ask 100 questions. They would want to do things differently. And so this is his way of cutting through that, is he just does it all himself. So when he wants to engage in questionable activities that don't seem to have anything to do with what prosecutors do, he just does it. And he doesn't answer to anyone, really. I mean, he technically answers to the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General, but I don't think, I guess, is that Todd Blanche already? Is Todd Blanche already in? I don't remember if he's been confirmed yet.
Know.
But it's whether it's Todd Blanche or Emile Beauvais, whoever's actually overseeing him, neither of them are stopping Ed Martin from doing whatever he wants to do. I guess I just before I turn it back to you, one other thing I want to say is I am troubled by the fact that we keep seeing all these really principled people resigning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, perhaps we could come up with something different for you to do at the end. Like, what you're doing is wrong, and I'm going to file a whistleblower complaint or something or make it known, but I'm not going to resign so that you can hire some stooge who doesn't know anything about prosecuting, doesn't know much about the law, and is willing to go along with whatever you want.
Yeah, I think that's really the dilemma right now, because what we see in the Denise Chung example is Ed Martin gives an order that is unethical, is insufficient, not in accordance with Justice Department manual or Attorney General guidelines. Attorney pushes back and is asked to resign. But if you notice, she also was coordinating with FBI agents who agreed and presumably would also push back. So the question is also with Kash Patel here, is it going to be a, pressure from both of them? Like, is he going to do that to the agent side as well? And then what is the alternative if people don't want to obey these orders? So she tried, Denise Chung tries, right? Like, you can see in her letter, she tried to find some kind of intermediate ground that she could, legally and ethically justify. But this is all about loyalty. This is all
Well,
about loyalty, unquestioned loyalty. Um, and I'm not sure. I mean, in many ways, Renato, like she writes this resignation letter, she is exposing it. In some ways, if she went to a whistleblower, if she did a whistleblower complaint, we wouldn't see it. It wouldn't be public.
I hear you. And I guess my point is just the problem is at the end of the day, she's gone and somebody else is hired. I mean, one thing that I'll just, as an aside, mention to you, Asha, that's been happening over the last week. Thousands and thousands of federal employees have been losing their jobs.
Yeah.
I have personally gotten many, many, many resumes. Law firms are just overwhelmed with resumes they're receiving from people and aren't hiring because also at the same time, government activity against, on a whole bunch of fronts against anyone who could pay your bills. So it's going down, right? Because the government's like, we're not enforcing as much. We're not going to be bringing as many white collar matters. We're going to be focusing on going after the blue states and migrants and transgender Americans and others. And so accordingly, there's been the sea change, but yet at the same time, I'm seeing on LinkedIn government agencies controlled by the Trump administration posting saying they're hiring and looking for new applicants. It's very interesting. And the reason I say that is I'm worried that the Denise Chungs of the world are gone. And then Jane Doe is hired to replace Denise Chung. And Jane Doe maybe isn't even an evil person, but is just doesn't know any better and doesn't realize that when she's told by her supervisors to just send random letters to people asking them questions or to freeze bank accounts with no authority, with no predicate, that she's just going to do it because that's what she believes the right thing to do is.
Yes, and we've seen that already taking place with Emile Bove has put two political appointees in the position that's usually given to like career attorneys in the positions that review employee ethics and discipline. One of them is like graduated from law school last year. So yeah, I think we will be seeing that. And if you'll recall, I'm sure that this is also a part of the Project 2025 operation because they had compiled like a list of thousands of loyal people to bring in to fill these jobs that they had like pre-vetted and that were kind of ready to go to be this. And then also you have this executive order coming down that's basically saying you can't question these orders because they are everything that happens in the executive branch that involves, executive functions is only for the executive branch to interpret and decide. Basically,
Right.
law.
So, I mean, if we had a 3-hour podcast, we would have had a whole other segment talking about this. But it is a remarkable executive order coming out from the Trump administration. I know most of you are aware of it at this point. It's been discussed at length. I will say, from a legal perspective, it's not as crazy as a lot of the other stuff they're doing, but it's a big change. And some of it is less big than others. I mean, certainly some of it where it's like we're taking control of these independent agencies, like let's say the SEC, that's very notable and a big change, but there's at least colorable arguments on both sides of that. And I don't know where the Supreme Court's going to come out. But the part of it that's most interesting to me is this idea that the president and the attorney general are the only ones that interpret the law. And you have to follow their views. It's a unitary executive view, which we've talked about, I think, in the past, where their interpretation of the law is what counts. And if you don't agree with their interpretation of the law, you need to see the door. And that's a very, very big change. And if the Supreme Court endorses that, which it is not yet, that would be a radical change to how the executive branch functions in the United States of America.
It will be very interesting to see because what we have is the president and the executive branch has usurped Congress's authority. And basically it's kind of primary authority. It's a power of the purse, which, that's the power grab there. And if they can go all the way, and if Congress lets them, then that's, one branch that's captured. Then the question is if they're going to usurp this power from the judiciary. And I think the question to ask now is, will the judicial branch allow it? Are they going to give up their power the way that we see Congress giving up its power? I mean, Congress is clearly on the way to being like, whoa, we don't care, even if it's, our authority or our laws, or even if it violates the Impoundment Act. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know either, Asha. And that's why I said I kind of had this a statement that probably seemed odd to some of our listeners, where I'm like, it's not the most legally crazy thing that they've done, because there's certain things that the Trump administration does that just like violate laws. And it's just on the book. There's no defense to it. It's just like the law says X and they did Y. This, like,
This is a legal theory. This is based on an interpretation of executive power.
Right.
One that the Supreme Court has seemingly been on board with, even up until the immunity decision. But the logical extension of that is, I think, to drastically undercut their own authority as a co-equal branch.
It also, one thing it also is going to do, and it's very interesting, because it is in some ways it's very not conservative, in that it's going to mean that we're potentially going to have very radical transformations on a 4-year basis of how the entire federal government operates. Because just like President Trump wants things to go one direction and everyone has to obey his edicts, if President AOC is the next one in line, she may have a very radically different view of what all of these agencies should do, and every organ of the federal government should do. And if our government switches on a dime like that, it's going to be a radically different America than we've had in the past.
Renato, then I don't know where you were in con law, because I think you missed the part of the Constitution that says that the unitary executive all the executive power vested in the president only applies to Republican presidents.
Yeah, white men, Republican presidents.
Yeah. Otherwise, the comments are off. Yeah.
And then it's crazy. Everything to do is absolutely insane and needs to be stopped. But it's interesting because, of course, my point is, giving all this power for sweeping change, it's very, very progressive in a certain way. It's in the sense of allowing change, where traditionally, that's why I say this is not a conservative, it's a radical. It's not a conservative administration, it's a radical administration. It's an administration that wants to radically change our Constitution and our way of life. Very different. And if that is applied equally down the line, I don't know what this is going to mean for America.
I don't either.
So, Asha, before we go, I do not make it to the movie theaters as much as I used to. I think since the pandemic, I watch too much at home, but I love going to the movie theater. And I did go this weekend to see the new Captain America movie. Not quite as good as like the kind of the core Marvel movies that I liked, but I enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of the character, and I like what they did with Captain Sam Wilson, who used to be the Falcon. It was cool. And it was a fun movie. Are you a superhero fan at all?
I am. I'm a big superhero fan. I think I've watched all the Marvel movies. Because my son was really into them, and then they would confuse me. Like, there's just too much going on. But I did finally get the order that you're supposed to watch them to kind of make sense of everything. And so I've forgotten a lot of it, but I do like them. I am a DC Comics gal.
Really?
Yeah. I really liked Justice League, and
what?
I know, why is everybody saying that? I love the Wonder Woman movie. I thought it was really
that was good. That was good.
good.
But the Justice League movie, not so much. Yeah, it's dragged on. What I don't like about DC is the superheroes there are too good. They're too strong. They're too powerful. They're too perfect.
That is the point.
No, but then you can't. There's never any drama because they're gonna change. It's like Superman always has to be dumb, because if he was smart, then he would just roll everybody all the time.
Wait,
the movie would be 5 minutes long.
Don't insult Superman.
Oh my God! Wow.
Superman's my
Okay.
favorite.
Really?
Yes.
See, of all the DC comic heroes, I like Batman the best because he was more flawed and more interesting, more
Batman is
limited.
a poser, man.
What?
He's just a rich dude with gadgets. Like,
That's what makes him
like
interesting.
then what if it was like Elon Musk who had all these gadgets? Like it is about the inherent goodness.
Yeah, but it's that he's aspiring to try to do something good, even though he's limited in his powers. Just like how Captain America Sam
Is he
doesn't
really
have
aspiring
super
to do
serum.
good though, or does he have childhood trauma?
That too makes it an interesting character because he's complicated, complex, as opposed to like I'm a do-gooder with unlimited power, and yet there's still evil in the world somehow. I don't know how. I must have missed it.
Superman can fly.
He can do it. He can do it all.
Batman cannot fly.
That is true. Well, with his little bat chip. But
Hey,
yeah,
little
bat wing.
factoid here. The person who came up with Wonder Woman, Marston, I think is the last name. You can look it up. You know, the golden lasso that makes you tell the truth.
Yeah.
Same guy who designs the polygraph.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. Is that
Mhm.
like an FBI thing? Like all the FBI agents know that one? Because they have
No, I learned that from reading a book called The Secret History of Wonder Woman.
That's cool. I liked Wonder Woman. That was the best of all of the movies. The second one, not so much though.
I
1980.
like the second one.
What? Okay, I'm not with you on that one. All right, let us know what you think. Are you a Marvel or DC person?
And do you like Superman or Batman?
Okay, deal.
Superman.